Thank you very much, Marco, for your introduction, and thank you all for being here today. So the topic of today's presentation deals with motor invariance in action, execution, and perception. So motor behavior is a very complex phenomenon that is characterized by several degrees of freedom and variability. It is characterized also by phenomena such as motor equivalence and motor redundancy. But despite all of this, we can recognize some stable traits, some regular attributes of motor behavior in our movement. And in this presentation, I will focus mainly on the kinematic side of these invariant attributes of biological motion. Biological motion is a movement generated by biological agents, such as humans and animals. And in order to overview the kinematic invariants that characterize biological motion, I will try to follow an order of growing complexity in terms of sensory motor planning and control processes. And since these kinematic invariants span multiple levels in terms of space, of spatial and times scale, I try also to discriminate between a macroscopic scale of kinematic invariance and a microscopic scale. So I will start with the speed accuracy trade-off and Fitts law. Then I will move to the minimum jerk invariance on the macroscopic side, and I will cover also the microscopic counterpart of these invariants, which is represented by some movements. Next, I will cover also the maximum grip aperture and hand pre-shaping. And finally, we will move on to the intentional effects of motor behavior on a kinematic side. So, starting with the speed accuracy trade-off. Speed accuracy trade-off is the inverse relationship between movement velocity and movement accuracy. It has been first observed by William Woodworth in 1899. And basically, the higher the accuracy that is required for a movement, the slower the movement will be performed. More than half a century later from Woodworth's first observation of this phenomenon, Paul Morris Fitts mathematically formalized this speed accuracy trade-off. Here on the left, you can see the experimental paradigm used by Paul Morris Fitts. Very briefly, he had participants holding a stylus on a central starting position and pointing toward a target either on his left or on his right. Importantly, the amplitude of the movement, so the distance of the target from the starting position, could be modulated during the experiment, as well as the width of the target, so the size of the target. Fitts had participants performing this task both in a serial way and in a single way. So, namely, in a serial way, participants had to point toward the right target, then going back to the central position, and then point toward the left target, and so on. Whereas in a single way, the stimulus light indicated which was the direction that participant had to point to, and then participant had to point toward the target indicated by the light. Importantly, the task had to be performed under speed constraints. So Fitts instructed participants to perform movement as fast as they could. And on the right, we can see the linear relationship between the difficulty of a movement on the x-axis and the time required for that same movement. And the difficulty of a movement is given by this mathematical formula, which is now known as Fitts law. So MT stands for movement time, whereas A stands for amplitude of the movement and W stands for width of the target. And that specific quantity, the logarithm in base 2 of the ratio between the amplitude and the width of the target, has been called by Fitts the index of difficulty of a movement. This mathematical relationship, Fitts law, has been proved to hold for several end effectors and different motor behaviors, therefore constituting an invariant attribute of human movements. For example, it has been proved to hold true for movements performed by the leg, but also for movement performed by the trunk, and so on. So it is a very robust characteristic of human motor behavior, but it doesn't give us any information about how the kinematic of a movement unfolds over time. It gives us only the information about the relationship between movement time, movement amplitude, and target size. So if we consider the kinematic of pointing or reaching behavior in unconstrained situations, so when we do not have to avoid any obstacles along the way, we can see that reaching behavior follows generally a straight path. And this has been first observed by Piero Morasso in 1981. Above, you can see the experimental paradigm used by Morasso. Again, very briefly, he had participants performing reaching movements by holding a manipulandum that allowed movements only on 2 dimensions, so on a plane. Participants started by from a central position, which is T1, target 1, and then according to experimental instructions, moved toward one out of all the other targets that are displayed there. And in a replication of a similar experimental paradigm performed by our lab that you can see below, you can see the path of this reaching behavior. Colored lines depict the path of a single trial toward each direction, whereas dotted lines are all the other trials. So you can see that the straightness of the path is a characteristic that hold true for each direction. What is the kinematics of this movement? So what if we compute, for example, displacement of these movements? We can see that displacement of the movement, the trajectory, has a characteristic sigmoid profile. Here you can see in black thick line the grand average of all the trials performed, whereas the color lines are the single trials that you saw also in the previous figure. But if we compute the velocity of out of this movement, we can see that it assumes a very specific bell-shaped velocity profile, which is the main characteristic that also Morasso observed. Also, if you see the acceleration below, it has a very recognizable profile that has been also documented. And importantly, this bell-shaped velocity profile of unconstrained reaching behaviors has been first postulated again by William Woodward in 1899, that discriminated between a first impulse phase of reaching behavior, a forward phase of reaching behavior, and a second current control or feedback-based phase of reaching behavior, in a framework that he defined as the 2-component model of reaching or pointing behavior. So this holds true in unconstrained circumstances. But when we perform our movements in everyday life, we usually have, for example, to avoid obstacles, or we may also have task constraints that force us to perform movements in curvature paths. So what happens when the movement that we perform is curved, for example? there is a law, which is called the two-thirds power law, that relates angular velocity and curvature of the movement. So angular velocity is related to the curvature of the movement raised to the power of two-thirds. There are also equivalent formulas for this two-thirds power law that that find the relationship between the tangential velocity and the radius of a curvature of a curved movement, or with the curvature itself of the movement. But the key concept remains the same. So the higher is the radius of the curvature, so the lower is the curvature, the higher is the velocity, the angular velocity of the movement. And on the contrary, the lower is the radius, so the higher is the curvature, the lower is also the angular velocity. This law has been first observed by Laquaniti and colleagues in 1983. They had subjects performing drawing movements. You can see an example above. It is more a scribble than a drawing, but anyway. Whereas below, you can see the relationship between the curvature raised to the power of two-thirds of the movement and the angular velocity of the movement itself. And the red colored line is the average relationship between these two variables. So what these two typologies of movements have in common, the bell-shaped velocity profile movements in unconstrained circumstances and the two-thirds power law movements that obey the two-thirds power law, is, however, the smoothness of the trajectory, the smoothness of the velocity profile. And in the same year, within a framework provided by optimal control theory, scientists tried to model this smoothness of human motor behavior, coming up with what is known as the minimum jerk model. So jerk is the third derivative of displacement, or if you want, the first derivative of acceleration. And assuming jerk as the cost function of human motor behavior, so something that we want to minimize in our movements, Neville Hogan in 1982 came up with this formulation, which is the original formulation by Neville Hogan, that defined jerk as a cost function of human movement. So we have capital jerk in capital J, which is jerk, and italic J, which is jerk at any time points. Sorry, capital J is the total jerk of the movement, so the cost function. And this minimal jerk model has been proved to hold true both for unconstrained reaching movements, so movements characterized by the bell-shaped velocity profile, and also for curved movements, so movements obeying the two-thirds power law. But it has been also generalized for several end effectors. So, for example, it has been generalized for movements of the eyes, movements performed with the jaw, and also, for example, for violin bowing movements. It has also been generalized for other animal species, primates, of course, but also for invertebrates such as the octopus. And also this model provided material for humorous jokes within the motor control community, as showed by Reza Shadmer last year on Twitter/X. So smoothness seems to be something that we want to optimize in our motor behavior. Optimally smooth minimum jerk movements are movements that are efficient, actually. But Woodworth himself in 1899, in his two-component model, postulated that during the current control phase, the feedback available during the movement may allow for recorrection of the movement. And so in discontinuities in the trajectory and in the velocity profile of the movement. And indeed, if we look at the microstructure of human movement, we can see that movement is organized into some movements. This has been first observed in pointing behavior. Here on the left, we can see the characteristic sigmoid trajectory profile of a pointing movement, whereas on the right, we can see the velocity profile characterized by a bell-shaped velocity profile that we saw in the previous slide. But after the main peak velocity of this movement, we can see a little extra bell-shaped velocity profile, a little extra peak velocity after the main component of the movement itself. So visual and kinesthetic information may allow for fine corrective adjustments after the main peak velocity. But soon after, it became clear that to investigate some movements, tracking behavior is a most suitable context. Here on the left, you can see the displacement of a tracking task performed by a monkey, in this case, whereas on the right, you can see the velocity profile. And these little discontinuities in the middle that are very clear are indeed some movements. Some movements are deemed to represent the intermittent update of motor control signals on the basis of sensory, mainly visual feedback. And these small discontinuities, these submovements in the velocity profile are quasi-periodic and have a characteristic frequency between 1 and 3 Hertz. So going back to reaching behavior, when we reach towards something, it is usually to grasp something. Okay, so we may expect that the size of the object may shape the kinematic of our movement while we reach to grasp that object. And indeed, there is a relation between object size and the shape of the hand. This has been first observed by Marc Genreau in 1984. Here you can see an adaptation of an original figure by Genreau, where the velocity profile of one single reach to grasp movement is displayed in a black thick line, whereas the red line depicts the grip aperture over time of that same movement. And this specific profile, this and pre-shaping, has been observed to show a characteristic biphasic pattern comprising an opening phase and a closing phase. But the point in which grip aperture peaks actually has been called the maximum grip aperture and is a key concept in human motor control literature, because it has been shown to covary linearly with object size, but also it has been shown that the size of the objects modulate and reshaping from the very beginning of a reach to grasp movement. Here you can see results from Answini and collaborators in 2015. Red line depicts a reach to grasp toward a large object. It's the grip aperture, of course, whereas the blue line is the grip aperture of a reach to grasp toward a small object. And you can see that starting from 20–30% of total movement time, the trace of the grip aperture is very different between the two movements. Finally, when we reach to grasp something, it is usually because we intend to perform something with that object. So we may suppose that the final goal of the action chain may be encoded in subtle kinematic features of our movement as the action chain unfolds over time. And these modulations have been called intentional effects. They have been thoroughly investigated by David Rosenbaum and his group starting from the 1990s. He discovered two of them actually, but today I will cover only one of them for the sake of time, which is called the grasp height effect. And there is an interesting, actually, story behind the discovery of this effect that I would like to tell you. Rosenbaum was managing with a toilet plunger at home, and he observed this effect on himself. And instead of designing an experimental paradigm that replicated in laboratory condition that same effect, he just decided to bring the toilet plunger to the lab. And the experimental paradigm is quite clear because you had the toilet plunger on a middle shelf, and subjects were asked to move the toilet plunger toward an upper or lower shelf. And Rosenbaum and colleagues just measured the height at which the object was grasped. The results are very clear and demonstrate an inverse relationship between the height of the platform toward which the object was going to be moved and the height at which the object itself was grasped. So an object is grasped at different heights depending on the final purpose, on the final action goal of all the action chain. So such as the initial kinematic of the movement encodes already the purpose toward which that object is used for. So, as an overview of what I covered up to now, we observed that despite the motor variability and the several degrees of freedom of motor behavior, we can recognize indeed some irregularities in our movement. The kinematic regularities probably spring also in order to solve, for example, the problem placed by the several degrees of freedom that characterize our movement. But it is important to stress that when we talk about the problem, the degrees of freedom problem, this is not a problem that is faced only by the actor, so by who is performing the action, but it is also faced by who is observing that action. So we may suppose that since there are these kinematic regularities in our movement, in an otherwise very complex phenomenon, we may use these kinematic regularities as observers to understand what is going on in a social environment and to encode the action of our conspecifics. And there are indeed some evidence that sensory motor processes may be at play in the observation of motor invariants. So again, for the sake of time, I will cover evidence only regarding the intentional effects and the maximum grip aperture. So on the higher side of the sensory motor planning and control processes complexity. So starting with the intentional effects, they have been thoroughly investigated in literature with paradigms that, for example, confronted grasp to drink versus grasp to pour action, as you see here. So these actions are very similar indeed, because we have a reach to grasp action toward a same object, which is the bottle. So we may expect that the kinematic differences between these two actions may be very subtle. We can see that, for example, these two actions may differ in terms of wrist height, as you can see on the left. But we would not expect, for example, a huge difference in terms of grip aperture, since the object that is going to be grasped is the same, it is a bottle. Also, we may expect some differences, very subtle differences in the velocity profile of these actions. So, Kuhl and colleagues in 2018 started investigating this action observation paradigm in an fMRI experiment. And They had subjects observing either a reach to grasp or a reach to pour movement, and they highlighted the presence of a frontoparietal network in this experiment with two main nodes, which were the inferior frontal gyrus and the inferior parietal lobule. And the same group, in a following experiment by Patria and collaborators in 2020, targeted these two nodes with a continuous theta bars TMS stimulation protocol during the observation of that same action. And they asked subjects to discriminate between grasp to drink and grasp to pour. So subjects had to guess if the action that they were observing, which was stopped at the contact of the end with the bottle, was a grasp to drink action or a grasp to pour action. And we can see that stimulation toward the inferior parietal lobule disrupted action intention discrimination, whereas the same stimulation toward the inferior frontal gyrus did not affect task performance. Another compelling evidence in a similar paradigm is provided by Soriano and colleagues in 2018. They had a very simple paradigm. They had subjects observing a reach to grasp action that ended up by drinking the content of a bottle or pouring the content of a bottle. But the action was stopped, was occluded when the end reached for the bottle. So the final goal of the action was not showed. They also measured electromyography from the mylohyoid muscle, which is a muscle involved in deglution. So it's a muscle that is involved only in the grasp to drink something and not the grasp to pour. And they probed corticobulbar excitability with single pulse TMS over the mylohyoid representation in M1. And results, as you can see, show that whereas at 25% of movement time, so when the action was occluded at 25% of movement time, corticobulbar excitability was not different between the two conditions. But when the action was occluded at the end of the reach to grasp movement, so when the actor grabbed the bottle, corticobulbar excitability is higher in grasp to drink condition, but not is in grasp to pour condition. So it is important to stress that the only information available to subject was provided by the kinematic of the reach to grasp, because the final goal of the action was not present, and the only information that subjects could gain for action discrimination was provided by the kinematics of reach to grasp movement. Concerning reach to grasp movement, we may also imagine that and pre-shaping also may play a role in discriminating, for example, whether we are going to grab a small object or a large object. And this is indeed an action observation paradigm that has been also investigated in literature. Recall that end pre-shaping is modulated by object size since almost the very beginning of a reach to grasp movement, as Ansuini and collaborators showed in 2015. The same group used the same kinematic recordings that we can see in this graph. So the same actions recorded that are displayed in this graph, and asked in a following study, asked participants to discriminate whether the reach to grasp action was performed toward a large object or a small object. They tested different conditions of occlusion of the movement from 10% to 80%. And we can see that starting from 20% of occlusion, so the orange line, the discrimination performance of subjects was already above chance level. But what I find very interesting is that already at 30% of occlusion, which is the green line, the discrimination performance of subjects is already almost at the ceiling. So subjects could discriminate very early whether a reach to grasp was performed toward a large object or a small object. Other studies, for example, the one by Ambrosini and colleagues, address the same experimental paradigm. So always a reach to grasp movement, which was or was not in this case occluded, as you can see. They first measured the accuracy with which subject is discriminated between the two actions. So whether the actor was going to grab a large or a small object by providing the information concerning pre-shaping of the hand during the video, or occluding the pre-shaping. And you can see how accuracy performance, so discrimination of the action, is facilitated when pre-shaping information are available. But they also measured the gaze behavior of subjects. So we already know that gaze behaves in a proactive fashion. So for example, when we observe a reach to grasp action, we may first observe the hand when movement is starting, but then our gaze promptly shifts toward the final destination of the movement, so toward the object. This is something that is already documented in literature. And by recording gaze behavior, they saw that this proactive gaze behavior, this anticipatory gaze behavior, was strongly facilitated when pre-shaping information was available, whereas it was less proactive or was even disrupted, for example, as we can see in the small condition, when the pre-shaping of the end was occluded. So returning to the overview of the kinematic invariants in motor behavior, I reviewed some of the evidence that human beings are able to collect this subtle kinematic information to understand what is going on in an action. So toward which object an action is performed, or with which goal an action is performed. We also know from the literature that every one of us, for example, has his own sensory motor style. So despite all these kinematic regularities in human movement, every one of us behaves from a movement point of view in different ways. And it has also been shown that these characteristics of that some characteristics of human movement may be proactively shaped in a social context, something that is called sensory motor communication, to facilitate the comprehension, the understanding of our motor behaviors. So in light of the evidence that I try to provide, we may speculate, and this is a speculative proposal, that there may be internal models that encode these kinematic regularities that are a part of our motor repertoire. So in an action observation context, are part of the motor repertoire of both the actor and the observer. And so these internal models may facilitate the observation and the understanding of actions in social environments. So these internal models across motor control and action observation may have these kind of features. This is a very schematic representation of an internal model, which of course is a theoretical construct. But anyway, we have an internal model that is shared between an actor and an observer because they both share the same motor repertoire. And this internal model may allow to understand what an actor is doing, may allow the observer to understand what an actor is doing. And this internal model, of course, may benefit of prior knowledge that may comprise contextual, symbolic information, environmental information, both from the physical side, but also from the social side, so the social context where an action takes place. But we may believe, we may postulate that kinematic invariance also may have a role in the prior knowledge of this internal model. And of course, the prediction error generated by an action observation by this internal model may reshape the prior knowledge of that conflates into these internal models, also in terms of kinematic invariance. What would be the case, for example? Since it has been proved that every one of us has his own sensory motor styles, it has also, for example, observed there is evidence that we are less prone to recognize sensory motor styles that are way different with respect to our own sensory motor style, probably because they are more distant from our own motor repertoire. So the first observation of an action performed by somebody that has a very different sensory motor style with respect to ours may be quite puzzling, but then the refinement of the prior knowledge given by the prediction error generated by this internal model may allow also, thanks to kinematic invariance, to refine the internal model, and then in the end, social interaction may benefit from this. So this would be very important for a species like ours that is inherently immersed in a social, in a strongly social environment. So as take-home messages from the presentation of today, kinematic invariance shape human motor behavior, shape our behavior, and may also facilitate action observation and understanding, as I brought to you. And the speculative proposal is that there may exist internal models that are tuned to kinematic invariance, and these internal models might be shared between actors and observers. This presentation covered the topics of a way more thorough review that has been published last year, as Marco said, on physics of life. And with this final slide, I would like to thank all the contributors to this work that you can see here. And I will also thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Francesco. Thanks. Thanks. And yeah, if there are any questions, I guess we can start the discussion.
I have a question. What do I do here?
Yes.
Really interesting presentation, taking us through some fundamental examples of these kind of kinematic invariants. There's, of course, a large literature that has looked into these kinematic invariants, some of which done by a few people here, that have shown that such invariant kinematics can arise from cost functions that don't explicitly factor them in, meaning that there's no need for the nervous system to program, for example, a bell-shaped minimum jerk trajectory per se. It arises because of some other constraints, right? Be they the physics of the arm or some other issues.
Yeah.
So how do you work that into your way of thinking about the overall organization of the motor system?
So I definitely agree with you that many of these kinematic invariants spring from biomechanical constraints, of course. For example, the bell-shaped velocity profile, as you said, is an inherent consequence also of the inertia of the arm. So, of course, we cannot move with a uniform velocity profile. We need velocity profile that has an acceleration phase and a deceleration phase. So, if I understand well your question, so what is my point of view in terms of the organization of the motor system? If I don't go wrong.
Yeah, sorry, just to sharpen maybe that up a bit. You didn't describe this. I mean, I'm just trying to understand. Maybe the answer is yeah, it's fine. This is the things that can be observed externally, and therefore these are the pieces of information that other agents are picking up on. But I'm curious about your view about the kind of neural implementation, I suppose, like what's happening under the hood to give rise to these, and whether that speaks to the kind of cartoon model you gave at the end with respect to, for example, shared internal models.
Yeah, I see. So as I said also in the presentation, that is only a speculative proposal. So in this specific terms, I don't have a clear view of the neural substrates that may be at play. Of course, I believe that the frontal-parietal action observation network may be at play in this in this action observation context by also collecting kinematic invariance for action understanding and action encoding. The mirror neuron system may be at play as well. I believe as mirror neuron system has a long story of research. So I believe that if we want to look for neural substrates of this kind of action observation network, we might look into that.
Mm-hmm. So in that view, the invariants aren't necessarily something that's under direct neural control per se. They're epiphenomenological.
No. I didn't say that. I'm sorry if I maybe I explain myself bad. So there may be some invariants. You mean let's cover up the actor side, okay? Okay. So in that terms, there may be invariants, as I said before, that are under biomechanical constraints, of course. There may be also invariants that are under more neural control. For example, some movements have been demonstrated to have neural correlates that may suggest that they are centrally governed. Also, when we come into more complex kinematic invariants, such as the endpoint shaping or the intentional effects, of course, they are way less under the constraint of biomechanical factors and way more under the control of under central control, of course. When we move toward the observer side, however, we should. I think we can agree that since kinematic invariants shape our the very characteristic of our motor behavior, we are exposed to kinematic invariants since birth. Not only because we too respect kinematic invariant, our motor behavior too respect kinematic invariant, but because we see kinematic invariants in others. So it is something that we are very used to observe in other conspecifics. I don't know if this answers your question.
No, I appreciate you elaborating on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Jörn?
Yeah, so thanks for the historical overview. That was kind of nice. But so your main thesis of shared internal models, I just wonder, like, what does it actually mean? Is that let me phrase it otherwise. Could this idea possibly be wrong? I mean, could you falsify this? I mean, is this actually something that says anything over and above that? Like, if our motor control is governed by internal model, if we accept that idea, I mean, that's just a decision that we make, theoretical decision to say our motor control, internal models underlying motor actions. then obviously because we move in a similar way, it also means that we, by definition, have similar internal models. Is that all you mean with shared internal models? Is there anything more to this idea?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Similarly?
Maybe I expressed myself badly. Sorry about that, but I mean exactly that. So as long as we share motor behavior, we may assume that we have internal models that govern the same action, that represent the same action, and that
is there any
that is
experimental result that would convince you that this idea is wrong? I mean, the question is this like a framework to think about it, or is this a falsifier?
No. It's a speculative proposal. It is a framework to think about it. The aim of this
hold on.
literature.
It's a speculative, so it's a framework to think about it, or is it an idea that actually makes predictions, i.e., is falsifiable? So that I didn't quite get from you. There are big differences, right? You can say the brain is a dynamical system. That's a framework to think about the brain. But you can say, you can make more specific things and saying like, maybe like action observation engages these particular circuits that are important for action production. That's a specific idea where you could design an experiment showing that idea is either right or wrong.
No, I mean, this is an idea that has to be tested, of course.
Okay, so show me, could you tell me an experiment that would tell you that this idea is wrong?
Well, I actually don't have an idea right now. You're right, but we are thinking about it.
That'd be interesting.
But this is a suggestion that I take. I mean, because the scope of this literature was to collect the knowledge about this field in order to provide an idea of how these elements may be at play. But in this very moment, we didn't came up again with an experiment that may prove the key the thing that you brought to my attention. I understand.
And also ask a question if there isn't any. Yeah, my question was, first of all, thank you for the thorough review. The question is, I was wondering about the pathologies here. Do you have in mind a series or one, or I don't know, like some list of pathologies that target one of these specific laws, or they usually always break together? For example, as my current understanding is that once the movement is broken, for example, in I don't know, Parkinson's disease, then every law that you mentioned here, that also goes like wrong. Like you lose like a clear bell-shaped velocity, movements are jerky, and everything goes bad. So I was wondering if there is like a specific pathology that just target one of them.
So you're asking whether so there are pathologies that, of course, disrupt the many of the environments that I viewed. So you're asking whether there are pathologies that may target the neural substrates that are involved in the observation part of these elements, or because I otherwise I didn't understand the question. Sorry.
No, I can restate. So I was thinking that if there are different neural substrates, for example, for the shape of the velocity versus the 2/3 law or like minimum jerk, so there be some pathology or some like a specific brain area, for example, that if it's lesioned or broken, then it affects one of them, but not all. But in other case, if they all go wrong together, that kind of points to the hypothesis that maybe this is the physical constraint that any mover has to move like that, essentially, regardless of the biology of it.
Regardless of the biology. Okay. So
may I add something before I don't think like the question I think kind of implies that different diseases like Parkinson or stroke have a limited biological substrate in the brain, but it's not necessarily the case. I don't know if I understand wrongly your question, Meredith, but for example, Parkinson, okay, there is a biological substrate like in the substantia nigra, but then the consequence of that impairment tend to be widespread across the brain. So I don't know if yeah, but tell me if I got the question wrong.
Yeah, that was the question. Maybe there is no specific brain area of pathology for it. That's totally a possibility.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
But you
So,
could
sorry,
expand that, you could sharpen that question by saying, is there, if you had all experimental power, forget any pathology that exists, but if you were God and you could manipulate the circuit at will, could you find some specific subset, subspace, set of neurons, type of neurons, something to which you could tie any of these kinematic invariances?
I don't think so. I don't think so, honestly. I don't think so, because the motor control. I don't think that there is one specific substrate that explains the control of any of these specific kinematic invariants. I don't think so. But Marco, do you think
yeah, but the like they could like not I would say not like a restricted one maybe, but could be the result of like a distributed
yes, of course,
yeah,
but a distributed network to
yeah,
not a very precise and circumscribed substrate.
Yeah.
Okay, may I have a question?
Yes.
I had some difficulty in understanding the motor invariance facilitate. Can you go back to the conclusion slide?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, it's
This slide.
the whole one there. So kinematic invariance shapes human motor behavior.
Yes.
I thought it was kind of the kinematic invariance kind of as a consequences rather than kind of the things that shapes motor behavior. So it's kind of hard to understand for me to kind of totally understand what you're saying here. And also the regular kinematic characteristics facilitate action, motivation, and understanding. So can you kind of elaborate more about the two conclusions you put up here?
Yes, of course. So we concerning the first, yes, of course. Concerning the first point, kinematic invariance shape human motor behavior. I can reformulate that like kinematic invariance represent the building blocks of our motor behavior. For example, they have been called also in the literature, some kinematic invariants have been called in the literature also motor primitives, for example. It's the case, for example, of some movements that I viewed before. So in that sense, they shape human motor behavior. And for what pertains the second part,
so the motor human behavior may consist of some kind of some building blocks. You mean the kinematic invariant? Is that the interpretation right, or you have some kind of other kind of meaning?
Yeah, I said that. I don't believe. I mean,
yes, yeah. In other words, human motor behavior could decompose into some kind of kinematic invariant, or you have some kind of meaning in that.
No, I don't believe that there is only kinematic invariance in human motor behavior. Of course, I just believe that kinematic invariance represent just the regular attributes of our motor behavior. So in that term, they shape motor behavior. In other words, we cannot choose to move in something very different from the invariants that I reviewed so far. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So please go on to the next one then.
Okay. So for what pertains to the next one, so regular kinematic characteristics facilitate action, observation, and understanding. It's a facilitation process because we may agree that in the action observation process, many information are at play that are not only provided by kinematic invariants, of course, but also by the context, the social and the physical context, for example, of the interaction. So what I say when I write facilitate means that, for example, as you saw before in the end pre-shaping example during an action observation paradigm, the presence of end pre-shaping in the video, in the action observation, in the video that was observed, facilitated indeed the discrimination between, for example, a large versus a small object toward which the movement was performed.
It does really kind of say that's kind of defined as kind of regularity or just kind of observation of some kind of the feature. So it's that it is hard to that is regular kind of invariant in the kinematics. Is that really kind of regularity or the observing some kind of the movement could kind of be result in some changes in the kind of physiological state, like it maybe could be, then it could be interpreted as a observation and understanding. But is that really kind of regularity? I wasn't kind of confused about the idea of the regularity in the pre-shaping or other kind of stuff. It's kind of just behavior, or there is have to be kind of some kind of regularity in that, so which is supported by the actual experimental. If I missed some kind of the key point in your experimental result, then I would like to hear about that.
Okay, so if I understand well, you're puzzled by the fact that it is hard to see, for example, a regularity in the end pre-shaping. Is that your question? Because actually,
shaping or other kind of the example of the invariance, but I wasn't really kind of sure what kind of regularity can facilitate that result or not.
No, I don't think I understand. Sorry, could you repeat, please?
So, so you show the kind of some the grip aperture variations in here.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
But was that kind of defined as the regularity, or I wasn't kind of sure what was regularity kind of invariant you try to say?
Well, for example, the fact that the peak of the grip pre-shaping, the maximum grip aperture, covaries linearly with object size. So this is an invariant of our movement.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Because I see that very clear.
Finally, the regularity, and it, does that really kind of facilitate the some kind of result? Could be kind of the observation and understanding at the end?
No. So this is
the regularity facilitate the action of the observation and understanding. Yeah.
Yes.
How could I was having kind of difficulty in connecting the regularity and the observation understanding, which was the kind of explicit without supporting the idea.
supporting the idea that
let me rephrase the question, I think, which is, and maybe streamline that a bit. Okay, so
yes, thank you.
is it that the movements are simply different? I mean, is the whole result related to the fact that there are differences in kinematics and that you can predict them? It's not clear that, of course, that requires differences in the actions, right? But it's not clear that it requires, and to that degree, I suppose it's going to require something that relates to these kind of invariants. But it could, but it doesn't have to. It could just be that, like, if the person wiggled their finger in a particular way when they were reaching for the big one versus the small one, a decoder would find that difference. But it's not necessarily obviously yoked to the invariance per se, right?
Yeah.
I think that's where you're getting at.
Okay, I see. So, well, actually, I think that concerning your question, the fact that, for example, the present or absence of end reshaping and the different amount of occlusion of end reshaping is I would not say a convincing proof, but actually it points toward the fact that the regularity of end reshaping toward a smaller or large object is collected to understand the action that is going on.
Yeah, you're saying, so let me just understand that. So you're saying that in that experiment or those kinds of experiments, people aren't shown the ultimate outcomes, but yet they come into the room with some, as in the language of your final figure, with some model of how people move. And this is in and of itself sufficient for them to know if they are going for a big thing or a little thing, for example. Is that correct? That would be evidence that they have internalized how they've observed other people's actions. I mean, otherwise you could come into the room and watch the person lift up left and right and notice that they wiggle their little finger on when they pick up a big one and not, and that's what you decode on. But that's not the point that you're making, is that? I assume it's more than that.
So basically you're saying there could be other factors that the other features that are decoded from hand reshaping that could be used by the brain to understand what the actor is doing. Is that what you're asking?
Well, yeah, it could be one possibility that you have to kind of negate in the end. So yeah, so they has to be kind of some regularity is kind of essential to facilitate understanding of kind of observation in the end. So,
but there could be regularities that do not pertain, for example, let's say regularity observed in executed movements.
Yeah. So I think so.
Okay.
Well, what could it be? What could be an example, for example, of these regularities that are not observed in executed movements?
Yeah, that's our question to you. That's our question to you. I mean, I guess that's the struggle, right? Is there anything over and above the fact that the person can tell that you're reaching for a big cup or a little cup that wouldn't relate to some systematic differences in how they do it? And I guess the point you want to make, if I understand it correctly, then is to say, yes, that those such invariances you're sensitive to because you've observed them not over your lifetime, not in the moment of that experiment.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Then I think we're all, I think that's the sum of what we can learn from that. Yeah, which is something. I think that was worth clarifying.
Right. Okay.
Great.
I think we are hitting if there are no more questions, I think we are hitting the end of the meeting. Are there any other questions?
No. Yeah.
No? Okay. Okay, so thank you. Thank you, Francesco. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone. And see you soon.
Thank you, guys.
You.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Ciao, Marco.
Ciao. Ciao. Ciao.